Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today, we'll be watching How Aurelian Restored the Roman Empire Part 1 by HistoryMarche. I know we've got a lot of Aurelian fans in the audience, truly one of the greatest Roman emperors, and I'm really excited to get into his life and career throughout this series. Now, if you guys end up enjoying this one, I would appreciate it if you would check out the Patreon. It is linked down below, and it will give you access to exclusive and regular reaction content. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this video. How Aurelian Restored the Roman Empire, Part 1 of 3. Let's get into it.
Amidst the rugged mountains on the dry, arid stretch of the Syrian steppe lay a wealthy city in a lush, fertile oasis. Adorned with sumptuous colonnaded streets, tetrapylons, majestic temples, spacious agoras, theatres and baths, elaborate stone reliefs, monumental Valley of the Tombs, and administrative government buildings, the city of Palmyra was the jewel of the Middle East and a melting pot.
Yes, Palmyra, as they are pointing out here, very important and prosperous city in the quote-unquote East. And remember, we're talking about this from a Roman perspective, so the sort of Roman East, the Middle East, basically.
At the crossroads of culture, with Roman, Greek, Aramean, Arabian, and Persian influences all on display.
Yeah.
For over 30 years, this was the place that Queen Zenobia called home, where she wove together the obligations of kinship, patronage, and civic solidarity.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're gonna get into it, but not to give too much up right at the beginning, but we're looking at a really fascinating time in Roman history, the crisis of the 3rd century, when a lot of territory sort of pulls away from the Roman Empire. In this instance, we're talking about Zenobia, a rather independent queen, and probably one of the most prominent examples of someone who tried to pull her territory away from Rome and move towards independence. But we'll see more of this and more of this more broadly throughout this series. In fact, this is sort of one of the issues more broadly that Aurelian will have to tackle.
That Palmyra demanded of its notables. But in the scorching sunlight of the late summer of 272 AD, the queen stood on the steps of the Temple of Baal with a troubled brow, her troops posted on the outskirts of the city. She firmly grasped her cloak in her hand as the smoke and fragrance of lingering incense filled the air, and the sounds of solemn hymns sung to flutes, drums, and tambourines, reverberated in the majestic hall. With a camel at her side, carrying a shrine in which a sacred stone was shrouded, Zenobia intoned prayers and made offerings of oil and wine, asking her god Baal for protection against those she perceived to be the invaders of her empire. However, the Emperor Aurelian deemed Zenobia's authority to be illegitimate and her bid for power unsanctioned.
Yes, he did. And like I said, Zenobia is one of the more prominent examples of one of these leaders, queen of the Palmyrene Empire, who tried to pull away from Roman dominance. Her mistake, I guess you could call it, is that she got a little too independent with it. She did it too quickly, too obviously, she was not cautious enough. Now, that's not to say that if she had been more cautious, her territory wouldn't have eventually been brought back under Roman control, but she sort of provokes this Roman response, especially from someone like Aurelian, who, like I said, sort of the main issue he tackles during his reign is uniting Rome, bringing Rome back together, taking back a lot of these lost territories, or not quite lost, but territories that Rome was losing.
And he came to Palmyra at the head of an army to settle the matter once and for all. This video is brought to you by our friends over at CuriosityStream. As their longtime subscriber, I recommend their history documentaries, where you can find
Fantastic. Alright, you guys know the deal. Go and check out this video from HistoryMarche. It is linked down below. Go give them a like, subscribe to their channel, check out their sponsor, give them some support for making these fantastic videos.
channel. Located in the semi-desert steppe of eastern Syria, Palmyra was a powerful city on the eastern edge of the Roman Empire. It derived a majority of its wealth from its location on the caravan trade routes of the Middle East. The city's merchants were renowned for their ability to secure safe passage of goods through treacherous country.
Right, and you can sort of see the important location that Palmyra is in, at a crossroads between many different cultures, but also at a crossroads between the two big empires of the region, the Roman Empire in the west and the Sassanid Persian Empire in the east. I mean, you can see in the bottom right corner, this is Ctesiphon, the capital of the Sassanid Empire, so clearly this is a very important and valuable spot to be. This is also a really interesting way to start off this whole series. I mean, you could think of a lot of different ways to start this. Start with Aurelian's reign, start with Aurelian's life, working through the ranks, but interestingly, we're starting with Palmyra, which is, of course, a particular part of Aurelian's career. Well, him dealing with that.
From one water source to another, especially during the dry season. Palmyrene traders operated throughout the empire and, more crucially, played a major role in connecting Roman Syria to the Middle Euphrates,
exactly,
and from there the Persian Gulf. Since the times of Emperor Caracalla, Palmyra enjoyed the status of a colonia. However, in the middle decades of the 3rd century AD, when the Sassanids fought Rome for control of Armenia and Upper Mesopotamia, Palmyra attained a heightened political and strategic...
Yeah, Shapur I, he did a lot of damage to the Romans. This is a point we're talking about this era, which we call, sort of the crisis of the 3rd century. Rome is having a really bad time. It's very chaotic. Rome is losing grip on a lot of its territories. Of course, the Sassanids are going to take advantage of that to the best of their ability, and so, in this political climate, territories like Palmyra, or Armenia is a really prominent one, grow in importance, and they gain a lot more leverage. Of course, they're sort of pawns in this great power conflict, but these smaller powers gain leverage in and of themselves. They can balance one power off the other.
Significance under the leadership of a prominent local aristocrat, Septimius Odenathus. The instability of warfare in the region threatened Palmyrene trade, and Rome expected the Palmyrenes to provide for their own security. This inadvertently helped the city to create a martial tradition of its own, and in the 240s and 250s, Odenathus used the reputation he had built up through his successful protection of the caravan routes from raiders and his position as commander of Palmyra's cavalry and dromedary archers to secure his dominance over the city and its civic council. By 251 AD...
And you can sort of see how, gradually, over time, Palmyra moves from this territory completely under the control of Rome towards, a little more autonomous, a little more, until the point when it is verging on full autonomy, verging on independence. Now, Odenathus is framed as this more cautious style of leader, and then Zenobia is the one who takes it too far. And I think there's truth in that. I mean, she is the one who sort of provokes this Roman counterattack. But I do think, had Palmyra continued to move in that direction, when Rome sort of got a grip on its affairs, it would have brought Palmyra back either way.
He and his eldest son, Herodian Hiron, were being honored in Palmyra as Resh, or leader, an unprecedented title among the Palmyrene elite. The two continued to amass power, claiming consular rank by 258, and in 259 Odenathus campaigned against the Persians, sacking the city of Nihadia on the Euphrates.
Now, that is a great way to build your own personal base of power, especially, I was going to say at this point in Roman history, but really at any point in Roman history. Do a bit of campaigning. That'll build your reputation, build your base of power, especially campaigning against the Persians. Yeah, that is a good way to build yourself up.
Odenathus's greatest opportunity then came in spring 260, when Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persians at the Battle of Edessa.
Yeah. Big Roman L. Probably one of Rome's biggest humiliations, to be honest with you.
Valerian's son Gallienus was left as sole ruler of Rome, but the disaster of an emperor falling captive in battle sparked a crisis of loyalties. A cascade of usurpers sprung up across the empire. In the unstable frontier regions, ambitious men seized power, usually elected by the troops or the local aristocracy, greatly contributing to the erosion of imperial authority and the decline of its internal structures. The populace suffered against incursions that were becoming increasingly difficult to check.
Yeah, I mean, the Roman Empire was truly falling apart. It was really losing its centralized control over its own territory. You know, you had a bunch of incursions from foreign powers. You had different generals, leaders rising up throughout the Roman Empire. Some of them were natives to the region. Some of them were native Romans who were just trying to usurp the emperor. You had a whole host of issues. And I think we'll get more of a chance to talk about Gallienus. I mean, if we're talking about Aurelian's early career, we're going to be talking about his service under Gallienus. But Gallienus, you know, even though he really struggles to stem the issues, he is a very active emperor. And he does a pretty good job campaigning around the empire to the best of his ability. I know we've got some Gallienus fans in the audience. He absolutely deserves some respect. He is, in some ways, a bit of a precursor to Aurelian, but we might get a chance to talk about that later.
Notably an Alemannic invasion of Italy that had already begun even before Valerian's capture, and which Gallienus eventually crushed outside Milan, as well as Aurelian and Gothic raids that saw the sacking of numerous cities in Greece.
Yeah, but I mean, look how bad this is getting. You know, do we remember the days of the all-powerful Roman Empire, the secure borders? Now, anywhere you look, there are foreign incursions into Roman territory, and not just along the border, but really deep into Rome. I mean, we saw Mediolanum being defended back in Italy. You know, these incursions are reaching the Italian peninsula. That's not good. Italy is supposed to be this most secure province of the empire. We look throughout the eastern provinces, the Goths are raiding up and down the coast. I mean, this is really a very insecure and chaotic point of Roman history.
Ionia, Thrace, and Asia Minor, including Byzantium, Argos, Corinth, Sparta, Olympia, and Athens, as well as the destruction of one of the wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. In the west, General Posthumus, his Rhine army, and the governors loyal to him broke away from central authority, forging a Romano-Gallic regime with Posthumus as emperor.
There you go. And this is what a lot of people think of when they think of this era. Not just foreign incursions into Rome, not just usurpers or rebels, but these independent breakaway states. As we've sort of referenced earlier in the video, the Palmyrene Empire, Palmyra, is one of these. The other, probably most prominent, is the Gallic Empire. And look how big this breakaway state is. This is clearly a disaster for centralized Roman authority. They're having this situation where these states are breaking away under, in this case, sort of, you know, Roman and Gallic leadership. Because also a lot of these provinces are very Romanized at this point. It's somewhat ethnic, right? There's an ethnic element to it, absolutely, but a lot of these people are extremely Romanized. They've been part of the Roman Empire for years and years and years, so it really is more about centralized authority breaking down and opportunists sort of seizing the opportunity wherever they can grab it. These people building up local power bases, but you have this Romano-Gallic Empire, which is attempting to totally break away from Rome itself. Looking at this point, you might think, well, this is the breakdown of Rome. This is basically Western Rome breaking away. Is Eastern Rome going to go next? Will Italy fall? What is going to happen? Rome seems like it's completely falling apart.
Further rocking an empire seemingly on the brink of disintegration. The Roman East was just as turbulent.
Yeah.
Macrianus, one of the main fiscal officers of the empire, grabbed the opportunity, using his influence as Valerian's treasurer to march on Rome. Planning to seize the capital, he took with him his eldest son, Macrianus Minor, intending to elevate him to the throne in the west. He left his younger son Quietus.
And it really was, and this is why I say, of course, in the Gallic Empire, the ethnicity, the different identity did play a role, but at the heart of it, it wasn't really about that. If you were anybody with any sort of power, regardless of, if you were Roman through and through, or if you were mixed, or if you were foreign, if you had a little bit of power, you would just seize the opportunity and try and usurp the throne and become emperor, or break away. Just anybody who saw an opportunity was just willing to take it because Roman authority was just so weak.
In charge of the eastern provinces, supported by the Praetorian prefect Ballista, who was instrumental in propping up Macrianus' sons to the imperial throne. The momentum to usurp the throne gathered behind Macrianus, but his army was intercepted and defeated in Thrace, with both he and his eldest son killed in the encounter. Meanwhile, Quietus and Ballista lost control over the eastern provinces. In a calculated show of loyalty to Emperor Gallienus, Odenathus marched on Emesa and overthrew what remained of the usurper regime.
And so this is why I say, I think there is truth to the idea that Zenobia sort of took it too far, but Odenathus, he was a lot more careful. He was careful to make a move like this. In this instance, of course he's fighting for his own interests, but he feels that the most intelligent choice to make is to remain loyal in one way or another to Gallienus, make a show of that loyalty by attacking the usurpers. Now, obviously, once again, he's just trying to cement his own position, but you could say this is maybe a more cautious way of going about it.
It was a clever move.
Yeah, agreed.
Gallienus recognized Odenathus' de facto authority, who was subsequently honored as restorer of all the East.
Well, it's funny because, if we look at the situation here, honestly, what Odenathus is doing is not too different than the Gallic Empire in the West. It's just sanctioned by Gallienus. He approves. So either you take the Odenathus route, you stay loyal to the throne, and then the emperor says, all right, I'm basically giving you de facto authority over your region. Great. You have almost full autonomy anyway. Or you can go the other route, completely break away, leave that loyalty to the emperor and say, I'm ruling my own territory. So it's almost a little bit funny how we basically have these provinces becoming more and more autonomous on both sides of the empire, just sort of in different ways. And, of course, the thing with the Palmyrene Empire is that, well, it eventually will become the Palmyrene Empire. It will break away. But at this point, still supposedly a part of the Roman Empire. And, the argument that is being made here by those who are breaking away, whether Posthumus or eventually the Palmyrene Empire, the argument being made is that, look, Roman authority is too weak. We cannot rely on the emperor, Gallienus, all the way out in Mediolanum to come and save us. he just doesn't have the resources. The Empire doesn't have the resources. We have to defend ourselves. And to defend ourselves, we have to be autonomous. Maybe we have to be independent. And to be fair, that's an argument that makes sense. Now, this 3rd century crisis of the 3rd century, is going to end with Rome being restored. And, well, the namesake of the series, Aurelian, has a lot to do with that. But in the long term, look what happens. Rome breaks down, splits into 2, and then eventually disintegrates. So I sort of think all these breakaway provinces and the empire splitting up, this is definitely a sign of things to come. Maybe they're just a little bit premature, or maybe Aurelian is just so powerful that he puts off the disintegration of the empire for a while to come.
Essentially becoming the Viceroy of Rome's most eastern provinces. This gave him authority over Roman governors and military forces in Syria and Upper Mesopotamia, which Odenathus used to great effect to help push the Persians out of the eastern provinces, recapturing Roman fortresses of Carrhae.
And so he's, this is great for Rome. He can say, look, I'm conquering all this new territory for the empire, but this is even better for Odenathus himself. I mean, you can imagine how popular and powerful he is now becoming. He's gained this new authority from the Roman emperor himself. He's fighting back against the Persians, taking their territory, defeating usurpers. I mean, this guy is a hero in the local region.
Nisibis. In a brazen move showing his ambitions, he had declared himself King of Kings, a challenge to the imperial claims of Shapur I of Persia.
Yep.
In 262,
and King of Kings, Shah, the title that the Shah of Persia took. That was sort of their thing. That was their fancy title. The Romans had theirs. The Persians had theirs. Odenathus is saying, yeah, I'm kind of crushing you guys in combat, so I'm just going to take your title, King of Kings. Now, that's a little bit shaky, because you could imagine that is a bit of a threat, perhaps, to the Roman emperor, but I'm sure Odenathus would say, oh, of course, this has nothing to do with my position within Rome. I'm still loyal to you, Gallienus. This is only in reference to the Persian territory I have taken. Surely.
In 266, he twice invaded Persian-held Lower Mesopotamia, reaching as far as the Persian capital Ctesiphon on both occasions, but was unable to take the city. In 267, on the emperor's orders, he also campaigned against Gothic and Aurelian raiders in Asia Minor.
Look at him go!
By now, Odenathus had reached the apex of his power.
Yeah.
However, members of Gallienus's court and Palmyra's elite were viewing his and his family's growing ambition with increasing concern.
And I'm sure you can see why. I mean, we have the breakaway Gallic Empire. Odenathus, he is so powerful. He really has this autonomous control of the region, the Palmyrene territory. He is getting closer and closer to just straight up splitting away from the empire, or even if he doesn't officially do that, he basically has full control of a lot of this territory in Eastern Rome. And you can see, with the help of Odenathus, Gallienus has cleaned up a fair amount of these foreign and internal incursions. Like I said, Gallienus doesn't bring this whole crisis to an end, but he does, I think, the absolute best job someone could in his position of campaigning and fighting as hard as possible.
Although the details vary between the sources, it appears that in 267 or 268, Odenathus and his son Herodian were assassinated in a joint Gallienic Palmyrene conspiracy.
Damn.
The plan backfired.
Oh yes, because who comes after Odenathus? Cautious Odenathus, who had technically remained loyal to the empire. I know it's kind of like, okay, well, you can see his self-interest was there, but, technically he had remained loyal to Gallienus. He had helped him out. Well, who comes next after Odenathus?
From destroying the power of his dynasty, his widow Septimia
you
Zenobia
go.
took matters into her own hands.
Zenobia, and she is far more aggressive.
She propped up her young son Vaballathus as the new restorer of the entire East, thereby treating her husband's viceroy position as hereditary, with herself taking the title of queen and ruling as regent. She wisely chose not to break ties with the imperial court, as she was not yet ready for war, but no one was left in doubt of the influence she possessed in the East.
Not yet ready for war.
Gallienus did not accept that Odenathus' position as viceroy, which he himself granted in the first place, could be passed on to Zenobia's son. However, the establishment of Palmyra in the east, coupled with the failure to defeat the Gallic Empire in the west, seriously weakened Gallienus. The stability of the Roman Empire...
I mean, the question is, what is Gallienus going to do? You know, sure, he could march straight to Zenobia and take her on directly, but he's got a lot of other issues to deal with, and one could argue much bigger issues look directly to his west, so he honestly just doesn't have the resources to handle all of these problems at once.
Empire deteriorated further still when he too was assassinated in September 268.
Damn.
Different accounts of the incident are recorded, but they agree that senior officials wanted Gallienus dead. The new emperor Claudius...
Okay, and that's how a lot of emperors are going to go in this period. So we haven't even mentioned Aurelian yet, aside from that sort of brief part in the beginning, but I should say Aurelian served and sort of moved up through the ranks under Gallienus. You know, he reached a fairly senior position by the time Gallienus was executed. He served in the cavalry. Aurelian had sort of come from a rather low position and really worked his way up, becoming more and more powerful within the military. Now, clearly, he still has a bit to go, but since they haven't mentioned it, I feel like it's worth bringing up that he had served quite well and quite successfully under Gallienus.
Managed to bring some stability. He stopped the Alemannic invasion of Rhaetia and Italy at Lake Benacus. He then marched east to meet a major Gothic invasion in the Balkans. At the Battle of Nisus, he achieved a major victory over the barbarians. However, the continuation of the war was less conclusive due to the outbreak of the plague, which affected the Romans, but savaged the Goths even worse. Many Goths who survived were either admitted into the Roman legions or had lands assigned for them to cultivate.
Yeah. And, you know, some would argue that stuff like this is sort of the start, or maybe not the start, but part of a very dangerous trend that will end up consuming the empire. And what I mean is that if we look at sort of the latter years of the Roman Empire, what happens is you have a lot of these different peoples, Goths, Vandals, etc., who are becoming more and more powerful as Rome sort of, in contrast, begins to weaken. And unlike in previous years, because, you know, Rome as an empire had always been about expanding and bringing other people groups into the empire and assimilating them, right? We can look at Hispania or Gaul or the eastern provinces or any number of places. The difference here is that Rome is sort of beginning to lack the authority to actually assimilate these different peoples. And so, you know, different groups of Vandals or Goths, because they don't all enter in one big group, sort of join the Roman Empire, but they sort of maintain their own structures, and they really don't become part of this Roman identity, or at least a lot of them don't. And so if we fast forward into the future, when this issue keeps building and building and building, a lot of these groups are going to act on their own interests and with very little loyalty to Rome itself. And, you know, if we look at this point and further into the history of Rome, you know, as we say, Rome will sort of keep losing power, and these, you could call them barbarian, that would be the Roman word, barbarian tribes become more and more powerful, with these barbarian leaders becoming more and more prominent within Roman politics.
Preoccupied with matters in the Balkans, Claudius sent an expedition against Zenobia under Heraclianus, a former Praetorian prefect, to reassert control over the east. The details are unknown, but the campaign was a disastrous failure for the central government. This was the point of no return. Recognizing weakness in the empire's central authority, in the spring of 270, Zenobia sent an expedition of her own to conquer the Roman province of Arabia. This campaign, commanded by her general Zabdas, defeated the Cyrenian Third Legion, killed its commander, and subdued its troops. Later that summer, the Queen launched an invasion of Egypt with an army consisting of Palmyrines, Syrian legionnaires, mercenaries, and barbarians.
Oh, scary.
It was a grueling, hard-fought campaign, but Zenobia's forces successfully took Egypt.
And look at that. My goodness, Zenobia is really expanding her empire, expanding it all throughout the Roman East, particularly the Roman Far East, into Egypt now. I mean, Egypt is a province with a lot of history, a lot of power, a lot of prosperity usually. And so she is really basically flexing her muscles, saying, all right, fine then. I'll show you how powerful I am. You know, I'll take all this territory from you. This is what I mean when I said she was far more aggressive than Odenathus. She was willing to just go for it.
Despite the setback in the east, in the empire's west, the Gallic Empire was similarly unstable, and the assassination of Postumus in 269 had prompted a series of defections. Claudius's trusted general Placidianus seized the moment and took control of southern Gaul after several victories. Hispania followed suit, breaking their allegiance to the new Gallic emperor Victorinus and declared their loyalty to Claudius.
It wasn't yet time for the empire to fall apart. Rome will live to see another day as the Gallic Empire begins to crumble in front of us.
But the emperor would not live long enough to reunite the lost territory.
Okay, and now we're heading to the end of Claudius Gothicus, so once again, it's worth pointing out that I mentioned how Aurelian sort of gets his start under Gallienus, moves up throughout the ranks. This just continues under Claudius. Aurelian really rises to a very important position within the military, and when you look at sort of some of the more powerful people within this ruling elite clique, now Aurelian is one of them. He holds a position of great authority. He has a lot of power at this point.
Territories. In the summer of 270, he journeyed to Sirmium, where he prepared for a campaign against the Vandals, who were raiding Pannonia. On the way, he fell victim to a pestilence, likely the plague of Cyprian, a form of smallpox, and he died in August 270. His younger brother Quintilius, currently stationed at Aquileia, was declared emperor by the Senate. But
remember, we're talking about the crisis of the 3rd century. The Senate? Nah. What does the army say?
Typical of the crisis of the 3rd century, the new emperor was not recognized by the legions that served under Claudius, who instead threw their support behind his right-hand man, the talented Illyrian cavalry general Lucius Domitius Aurelianus, more commonly known as Aurelian.
There he is.
It looked like more war and turmoil.
Yeah, this guy is illegitimate. Luckily, I have an army. Very typical response for the era. We talk about an earlier era of Roman history. The delineation between a legitimate emperor and an illegitimate emperor is fairly clear, but as we move into this point, this era of Roman history, crisis of the 3rd century and really onwards, the difference between legitimate and illegitimate becomes very fuzzy. I mean, what makes a legitimate emperor? Is it the approval of the Senate? Is it having an army powerful enough to claim legitimacy? is it having a long enough reign so that you're remembered as legitimate afterwards? Look, legitimacy is sort of a concept we have made up ourselves. Is someone legitimate? Well, if we agree they are, then they are. So, this guy's legitimate. It's a claim that doesn't really mean much at this point in Roman history. The real question is, do you have enough military and political power to claim the position of emperor and hold it long enough to make an impact?
Turmoil would engulf what remained of the Roman Empire. But the reign of Quintilius proved extraordinarily brief, possibly lasting as few as 17 days.
Damn.
He committed suicide, realizing he had little hope against the army of Aurelian. The Senate now recognized Aurelian as the new emperor, but he inherited a state in a dismal condition that had been disintegrating for the past 20 years.
Yeah. Really, still a pretty tough position. Now, we saw how, I feel like my point was sort of made, that Gallienus sort of stabilized the empire a bit, brought it away from the very edge, away from the brink. That's what Gallienus did. I said I think he's honestly a bit of a precursor to Aurelian. Now we get to Aurelian. The empire is not quite at that brink, but it is still in a very weakened position. It still has to deal with the Gallic Empire in the west, the emerging Palmyrene Empire in the east, foreign incursions in different places. So the empire is still in this very weakened state. It needs to reestablish that centralized authority. Gallienus has done what he could. Well, now it's Aurelian's time.
Vast territories remained outside of central imperial control.
Yeah.
Some for nearly a generation. Internal turmoil encouraged pressure from external enemies, and renewed incursions by the tribes north of the Danube spread devastation deep.
Yeah, and as you can see, the empire, Gallienus did sort of pull it away from the brink, but it's in such a vulnerable position that it would be pretty damn easy for the Roman Empire to fall right back into that extremely dangerous position where it looks like it is immediately about to disintegrate.
Into the interior. And with yet another emperor seizing power, the threat of civil wars again grew as new usurpers arose, exploiting the imperial insecurities and the influence of armies on Roman politics.
As always.
The spiraling political and economic crisis impacted agriculture and commerce the most, which was compounded by the pestilence that had first swept through the empire around the year 250, greatly diminishing manpower for the armies and taxation. Nonetheless, the new emperor...
Yeah, well, I'm sure you can imagine when you have all of these breakaway provinces, when you have all of these usurpers, when you need so many people to serve in the military, this is not necessarily a good thing for farming and commerce and taxation, right? First off, you have the pestilence, war, provinces breaking away. This eats into your imperial revenue. Then, of course, because of all those things, you need to bring more and more men into the army. And while they're in the army, well, they can't be participating in commerce or farming, so that's not great for taxation either. This is how we sort of enter into a death spiral of more and more conflict, more and more breakaway provinces. That leads to lower revenue, the empire has less resources, less power, which then leads to more breakaway province, and you can sort of see how the cycle continues. So, you need someone to put a stop to this. Gallienus did his absolute best pulling Rome away from the brink, but you need someone to turn this around.
Steeled himself for the difficult road ahead.
Can Aurelian be that guy?
Seeking to strengthen the image and power of her regime, Queen Zenobia skillfully played the political game. She exploited the turmoil in Rome, but was careful not to provoke a war with the new emperor. Her mints at Antioch and Alexandria recognized Aurelian as emperor, producing...
So, she's trying to play the same game that her predecessor did, right? She is building her own power base even more aggressively, but... even if it's extremely superficial, she's still trying to show some sort of allegiance, some sort of loyalty to the emperor. She says, hey, I may be invading your territory and claiming it for myself, but we're still loyal to you, Aurelian. It's very easy to see through, but I think she is playing the game of politics. And like I said, Zenobia is often framed as, well, she went too far. She was extremely aggressive, not nearly cautious enough. And I think eventually that is true. She does take it too far, but she is clearly a skillful and opportunistic leader.
Coins in his name. But she also now struck coins bearing the face of her son, Vaballathus, honoring him as Imperator, a military title of republican origins that was now associated with emperors.
Yeah, that's very sneaky. She says, well, I'm using it in its classic military style, just to mean successful general, because that is originally what Imperator meant, but, Imperator, for a long while now, has had very different associations, associations with the emperor. Though I will say at this point in Roman history, the emperor holds a whole host of impressive titles.
In this way, Zenobia gave him imperial status, whilst cleverly avoiding the title of Augustus, which would have unambiguous...
I mean, that's the most important title, Augustus. We also have Caesar. Caesar sort of, over time, becomes this title that sort of connotes junior emperorship in one way or another, sometimes officially, sometimes a little more unofficially, but Augustus, that is the most impressive title you can have. That truly means emperor, the guy at the top.
Designated him as emperor, blatantly challenging Aurelian's authority. Roman mints were spread widely across the empire, and emperors used them to make political statements to their subjects. The populace often learned of a new Roman emperor when coins appeared with his portrait. Thus...
I mean, think about it. If you are some random farmer living, I don't know, say in Hispania, or really any of these other provinces, if you're particularly rural, how exactly are you going to get news about a new emperor or news about whatever sort of politics are going on? One of the few ways you can get that news is coins. A coin will bear the image of a new emperor, and that emperor may include something on the coin. I mean, you don't have a lot to work with, but you can include some sort of symbol or some sort of image to send a message to people. And so if we want to talk about playing politics, building your political reputation or political image, especially amongst, your sort of average person, then the mint is one of the best tools for doing that.
The circulation of coins bearing Vaballathus's face undoubtedly solidified his authority over the Palmyrene domain.
Yeah.
But it was also an encroachment on Aurelian's authority. Zenobia's power play extended further. Her coins bore inscriptions that recorded the number of years that Vaballathus had ruled the East, thereby showing that he had been in power longer than the emperor, as if to suggest her son's seniority over Aurelian.
Yeah, very sneaky.
Coupled with this web of political intrigue, Zenobia began the expansion of her army and moved into Asia Minor. She captured Tyana in Cappadocia and Ancyra in Galatia, and attempted to seize Chalcedon in Bithynia, which resisted and remained loyal to Aurelian.
I mean, she is... we saw the Breakaway Gallic Empire, which basically broke away with almost the entire Roman West, excluding, of course, most prominently the Italian peninsula. Zenobia is now basically trying to conquer the Roman East, and like I said, in the end, this is not going to work out for her or for the Gallic Empire, in many ways because of our boy Aurelian here, but we look to the long-term future of the Roman Empire, and we do see that split right down the middle with East and West.
With this show of force, the Queen wanted to hinder any offensive by the Emperor, while she also played the long game, slowly building up the power of her realm.
Yeah.
But despite the Palmyrene expansion further hindering the empire's reunification, the Gothic problem in the Balkans remained unresolved, and Aurelian's own position was far from stable. The first order of business for the emperor was to strengthen his rule in the territories that were still under central control.
Yeah, and it really shows you sort of how much of a dangerous position Rome is in. And we saw this under Gallienus, but we're seeing it again under Aurelian, that he actually has to secure the Italian peninsula. I mean, this really is sort of the most central of the centralized Roman provinces. You know, if Rome has any control over any province, it should be Italy, right? I mean, we look at Rome, this is where it starts. It first expands out to the Italian peninsula. And so to have incursions even on the borders of Italy, that's a very dangerous thing. And so the first order of business is to secure Italy and then sort of go outwards from there. You need to secure your own position and secure the little territory that you actually have control over before you're going out to reconquer territory that's completely out of your control.
Aurelian was an exceptional leader of armies, and he campaigned with unmatched energy.
Yeah.
In 270, he stopped a Jutungian invasion of northern Italy, fighting a series of actions before defeating them in a decisive battle on the Danube. He caught them in the middle of crossing the river, weighed down with plunder and prisoners. However, while he was consolidating his power in Italy, the Pannonian frontier was left vulnerable to attack, and an army of Vandals crossed the river in force, pillaging the region. Later that year, he tasked Placidianus with defending Italy against a possible attack by the Gallic Empire, before departing east to set up his headquarters in Siscia. It was here that he assumed his consulship on New Year's Day, 271 AD. This office would normally have been assumed at Rome, and it was unusual for an emperor to assume the consulship without even setting foot in the old capital.
This is true, but this is also very illustrative of a trend that will continue throughout Roman history, which is Rome will become less and less important, especially when we have sort of campaigning emperors like Aurelian. We have a couple of these guys, especially during periods of military crisis, these emperors who spend their entire reign campaigning around the empire. They're never in one place for long. And so Rome itself becomes less and less important. Also, sort of another contributing factor is that the position of Rome, when military affairs is more of a concern, it's not really that defensible compared to other cities. And so focus will shift to Mediolanum, focus will shift to Ravenna, these cities closer to the borders. So, you know, when you're campaigning, which you always are now, you can get to the borders faster. And also these cities that are more defensible.
This was a further sign of the diminishing role of Rome in imperial pomp at this time. By now, the season had advanced, making it difficult for the Vandals to live off the land, and knowing that the enemy was not equipped for siege warfare, Aurelian evacuated the livestock and food supplies into the fortified cities. Once he was satisfied that the war of attrition had weakened the barbarians and that his own supply lines were established, he marched to meet the Vandals. The campaign was a grueling affair, but after an indecisive first battle, the barbarians were subsequently defeated in the Pannonian interior. The Vandals sued for peace, handing over hostages and providing 2,000 horsemen for the Roman army, and the Romans provided them with supplies for their journey back to the Danube. The emperor, however, had little respite in which to savor his victory, and in early 271 he was forced to march back west. The Jutungi had returned, this time probably with a coalition of other Germanic tribes, launching a major invasion of Italy.
Damn.
They destroyed numerous towns and countryside in the Po Valley, before pushing south, threatening Rome itself. At first, Aurelian's army suffered an ambush at Placentia, but he managed to regroup his battered army and follow the trail of devastation that marked the enemy's route down the Adriatic coast. Knowing that the Romans were on their heels, the barbarians stayed on the march, aiming to cross the Apennines towards the capital.
Yeah, chasing barbarian armies around the Italian peninsula, not a good position to be in. You know, they have swept right past the Po Valley, and they are now pretty deep into the Italian peninsula. Once again, this is a serious threat to Roman authority of any kind.
But Aurelian managed to catch up with them. On the banks of the Metaurus River, he achieved a major victory in the Battle of Fano. Subsequently, he pushed the invaders back across the Po River before dealing a crushing defeat to the Irtungi in the Battle of Ticinum.
Hey.
The victory broke the strength.
My mind goes to Hannibal because I'm reminded of when Hannibal was marching around the Po Valley and the Italian peninsula, seeing some similar names
Of the tribes along the upper Danube, and put an end to Germanic invasions against Italy until the times of Alaric in the 400s, nearly 150 years later.
Yeah, and this is something we see a lot with Aurelian. We have Rome really reaching sort of rock bottom, or at least so far. It'll get worse. But Aurelian sort of pushes the threats back, and then those threats don't emerge for a long time. We're talking, hundreds, 200s, hundreds of years, basically. Aurelian manages to secure some of these territories. Not to say everything is, fantastic after this for Rome. There's still a lot of struggles, but Aurelian really manages to push back a lot of these problems until pretty late in the history of Rome.
Meanwhile, the invasion caused panic in Rome itself, and this, combined with the endemic corruption, had sparked a major rebellion against the emperor. Aurelian force-marched his army to the capital, defeated the rebels and executed the conspirators, using the crisis to purge the political landscape of his rivals as well, many of whom had supported Quintilius.
Yeah, and I should be more exact with the dates. We're talking about sort of the mid to late 200s here, like 270s, and sort of as they pointed out, a lot of these issues will start re-emerging in, say, the 400s. So, to be more exact, Aurelian puts off a lot of these issues. I guess we're basically talking about like 150 years or so. Like 150 to 200 years is how long Aurelian puts off. I'm speaking very broadly. A lot of the more serious issues that Rome is really dealing with when it appears to be disintegrating. Once again, not to say that Rome is absolutely great for the next 150 years, but, a lot of those sort of serious, existence-threatening problems sort of stay back, at least for roughly that period of time.
Usurpers in Dalmatia and southern Gaul, seeking to exploit the chaos, were either defeated in battle or assassinated, and construction began on a massive new system of walls to better protect the capital.
Yeah.
But again...
And once again, and you can really, honestly, Aurelian's reign is great for this, looking at some of the trends that will characterize Roman history in the future. This is another trend, is the building of walls. Now, for a long time, the Italian peninsula had been very prosperous, and it really hadn't been threatened this seriously. But now, it is in a lot of danger, and so a lot of these cities, a lot of them have walls, but they're not very serious fortifications. And as we're entering this era of history, a lot of wall building begins. And, if we fast forward a bit into the future, do a couple hundred years, 200-300, or even further into the future, we see a lot of the cities throughout the empire become depopulated, as, population is sort of, spread out throughout the country, and the little urban population that is left is concentrated in these highly defended walled cities. That's sort of the only urban populations that can remain. And so walls become very important. They're trying to build new walls around Rome, but like I said, eventually Rome will be maybe not abandoned, but it will sort of be left behind in favor of other more defensible cities. I mean, Ravenna is basically in a swampland. It doesn't have the grandeur of Rome, but it is more defensible, if that's what you're concerned about.
Aurelian had no time to waste. After briefly overseeing work on the new defenses, the emperor marched back east to the Balkans. Due to his elevation to the purple and the resulting power struggle in Rome, the Gothic War remained unfinished business. And now the ranks of marauding bands had swelled, posing a great menace to Thrace.
Yeah.
They were led by King Canabas. This Goth was possibly none other than King Cniva, who had famously destroyed the army of the Emperor Decius at the Battle of Abratus 20 years prior. An event etched in the memory of the Romans. By the time Aurelian arrived with his army, the Goths had already inflicted considerable damage. But, in a stunning twist, the Roman Emperor inflicted on them a crushing defeat.
Hey!
However, unlike his predecessors, he did not stop there. Rather, crossing the Danube, he invaded their homeland and scored a decisive victory over King Canabas, who was killed in
Rome not just defending its own territory, but actually going a little further and invading foreign territory. That is a rare thing at this point.
combat. The Roman army then proceeded to sack Gothic settlements and lay waste to their lands. And in a planned propaganda move, countless captive women were deported to Rome to be later displayed dressed as Amazons in Aurelian's triumph. This was the most decisive victory a Roman army had in this region throughout the troubled 3rd century.
Wow.
Then, in a radical rethinking of regional strategy, the emperor withdrew Rome's military and administrative presence from Dacia.
Look at that major change. And now, I don't want to sound like too much of a broken record, but once again, another trend that we're going to be seeing a lot throughout the remainder of Roman history, and that is the abandonment of territory. It's just, simply as Rome has less and less resources and less control, it just can't afford to hold on to a lot of the territories it once had. Dacia is probably one of the earlier and most prominent examples of this. We can think, if we look much, much later, we can think about, say, the Roman abandonment of Britain, though that is in a much more desperate time as Western Rome is truly coming to an end, but this is another trend that we'll see a lot of. And, Dacia gets abandoned. And a lot of the residents there are Romanized, would consider themselves Romans, but the Roman Empire just pulled back the state, said, sorry, we can no longer govern you or protect you. And according to a particular perspective, now with a lot of history of ethnicities or different peoples, a lot of it's very contested, but according to a particular perspective, this is sort of what eventually leads to Romania. These Romanized Dacians will become the Romanians that we know today. Now, it is surely far more complicated than that, and we don't know if that even is exactly what happens. That is sort of a romanticized view of that history, but to my understanding, that is what a lot of Romanians think today. They look back on these ancient Dacians as their ancestors, their Romanized ancestors, so sort of an interesting tidbit there.
The province had been weakly garrisoned since the reign of Gallienus. By abandoning it altogether, Aurelian could rationalize the long and undermanned Danubian frontier from which he collected troops, and repopulate the Balkans, devastated by war, with the people he evacuated from Dacia. Now, he was ready to retake the East.
Oh, that's the next big challenge on his plate.
Goes to our awesome patrons who...
All right, retaking the East from Zenobia, the powerful Eastern queen. She is quite the threatening character. I mean, look, you can see the Palmyrene Empire, because that's what it is, the Palmyrene Empire. It has expanded fairly rapidly and fairly extensively. It has taken a lot of Rome's former territory, and even though, it still professes some sort of loyalty to Rome, that is a facade that is easy to see through. And now that Aurelian has a bit more wiggle room, he has defended the Italian peninsula, cemented his control of Italy, he's warded off incursions of the Balkans, and in fact pulled the Roman Empire back a little bit, so he has more resources for other regions. Now he's done that, he's cemented his position, he now has the room to go and take on Palmyra, go take on Zenobia, who, of course, is a big threat to Roman authority and Roman control of the East, sort of the East generally at this point, given how far the Palmyrene Empire has expanded. So yeah, some really interesting stuff to come. I really enjoyed this episode. We didn't get to Aurelian until quite a few minutes into the video. I think halfway through the video is when we got to Aurelian himself, but I don't mind that at all. I like that they took a while to sort of set things up, give us the build-up to Aurelian's reign. I think it's really fascinating stuff. I think this is a really interesting era of Roman history. So, if you guys enjoyed this one, I'd appreciate it if you would leave a like, subscribe, and check out the Patreon. It's linked down below. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.